The period from the 16th to the 18th century in Europe was marked by profound transformations in the realms of politics, economy, and society. Among these transformations, two interrelated developments played a central role in shaping modern European history: the rise of absolute monarchies and the dominance of mercantilist economic theory. These two phenomena were not only concurrent but also mutually reinforcing, as the centralized power of monarchs provided the political framework necessary to implement mercantilist policies, while the wealth generated by mercantilism empowered monarchs to consolidate their authority further. The foundations of mercantilism. Mercantilism was the dominant economic theory in Europe during the early modern period, spanning roughly from the 16th to the 18th centuries. At its core, mercantilism held that the wealth of a nation was measured by its stock of precious metals, especially gold and silver. Because the amount of these metals was perceived as finite, the acquisition of wealth became a zero-sum game among nations. What one country gained, another lost. To accumulate wealth, mercantilist thinkers argued for the establishment of a favorable balance of trade, in which exports exceeded imports. This approach encouraged governments to promote domestic industries, regulate trade, and impose tariffs on foreign goods. Colonial expansion was also a vital aspect of mercantilism, as colonies served both as sources of raw materials and as markets for the mother country's manufactured goods. Prominent economic thinkers like Jean-Baptiste Colbert in France and Thomas Munn in England articulated these ideas in their respective countries, advocating strong state involvement in the economy. Unlike modern economic liberalism, mercantilism emphasized state control, economic nationalism, and the subordination of economic interests to the power and prestige of the state. Political context. The decline of feudalism. The rise of mercantilism coincided with the decline of feudalism in Europe. During the medieval period, political power was fragmented, with local lords wielding significant autonomy from central authority. However, as Europe transitioned into the early modern era, a number of factors undermined this decentralized structure. The growth of towns and commerce, the advent of gunpowder warfare, the weakening of the nobility, and the development of bureaucratic institutions all contributed to the emergence of strong centralized states. Monarchs, seeking to expand their authority and stabilize their realms, increasingly asserted control over the church, the nobility, and regional parliaments. This centralization of power culminated in the rise of absolutism, a form of monarchy in which the sovereign held supreme authority, unconstrained by traditional institutions such as representative assemblies or customary law. Absolutism defined. Absolute monarchy was characterized by the concentration of all governmental powers, legislative, judicial, and executive, in the hands of the monarch. The king was seen as God's representative on earth and often claimed a divine right to rule, justifying his authority as ordained by heaven. Unlike constitutional monarchs who shared power with parliaments or other bodies, absolute monarchs ruled without significant legal constraints. The most famous exemplar of absolutism was Louis XIV of France, the so-called Sun King, who reigned from 1643 to 1715. His oft-quoted phrase, "L'État, c'est moi," I am the state, encapsulated the essence of absolutist ideology. Under his rule, France became the most powerful state in Europe, boasting a large standing army, an efficient bureaucracy, and a booming economy guided by mercantilist principles. The mercantilist-absolutist nexus. Mercantilism and absolutism were interdependent. For mercantilist policies to be effective, a strong central authority was required to regulate trade, impose tariffs, manage colonial affairs, and direct the economy. Absolute monarchs, in turn, relied on mercantilism to enhance their state's wealth, finance their armies, and maintain their control over society. In France, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the finance minister under Louis XIV, implemented a sweeping program of economic reform grounded in mercantilist thought. He increased tariffs on imported goods, subsidized key industries like textiles, improved infrastructure, and established overseas trading companies. These measures were designed not only to enrich the nation, but also to increase the king's fiscal resources, allowing him to maintain his absolutist regime. In England, although the monarchy never achieved the same degree of absolutism as in France, mercantilism still played a central role. The Navigation Acts, passed in the 17th century, aimed to protect English shipping and commerce from foreign competition, particularly the Dutch. These laws bolstered England's naval power and facilitated the growth of its colonial empire. In Spain, mercantilist policies were also adopted, although with less success. The vast influx of silver and gold from the Americas initially enriched the Spanish crown, but eventually led to inflation and economic stagnation. The failure to develop a strong domestic economy and the reliance on imported goods undermined Spain's long-term mercantilist goals, even as the monarchy attempted to maintain absolutist control. Colonialism and imperial expansion. The global expansion of European empires was both a cause and a consequence of mercantilist policies. Colonies were seen as essential components of a nation's wealth and power. They provided raw materials that were otherwise unavailable in Europe, such as sugar, tobacco, cotton, and precious metals, and served as captive markets for the mother country's manufactured goods. To protect and exploit these colonies, European powers expanded their navies, established trading posts and settlements, and often engaged in military conflicts. The Anglo-Dutch Wars, for instance, were driven in large part by competition over trade routes and colonial possessions. Absolute monarchs played a central role in organizing and financing these imperial ventures. In return, the wealth generated by the colonies strengthened their ability to govern and enforce their authority. Thus, mercantilism not only facilitated economic expansion, but also buttressed the political ambitions of Europe's monarchs. Social consequences. The rise of mercantilism and absolutism also had profound social implications. The power of the traditional feudal aristocracy declined as monarchs built new bureaucracies and recruited professional administrators and military officers from the middle class. This created a new elite that owed its status and livelihood directly to the crown rather than to inherited privileges. The increasing regulation of the economy often disadvantaged the lower classes, particularly peasants and urban workers. Prices rose due to inflation and heavy taxation, and the benefits of economic growth were not evenly distributed. However, the burgeoning merchant class, especially those involved in overseas trade, flourished under mercantilist policies. Meanwhile, in some regions, absolutism faced resistance. In England, the struggle between Parliament and the Crown led to the English Civil War and the eventual establishment of a constitutional monarchy following the Glorious Revolution of 1688. This divergence from the absolutist model would have far-reaching consequences, particularly in shaping the development of liberal political and economic thought. Conclusion. The rise of absolute monarchies and the dominance of mercantilist economic thought were defining features of early modern Europe. These two developments were closely intertwined, each reinforcing the other. Absolute monarchs provided the centralized authority necessary to implement and enforce mercantilist policies, while the wealth generated by these policies enabled monarchs to consolidate and expand their power. While mercantilism would eventually give way to classical liberalism and free market economics, and absolutism would be challenged by democratic revolutions, their legacy shaped the trajectory of European history. The centralized states, global empires, and commercial rivalries of the early modern period laid the foundation for the modern world system, making the study of mercantilism and absolutism essential for understanding the roots of contemporary global politics and economics.